any drive you take that cannot be made better by driving a 65 GT350. They're the perfect Sunday morning drive car. They're the perfect cruise night car. And when people ask you, is it real? You can look at them and say, it sure as hell is. So how much is one of these worth? Well, if you go to Hagerty.com, we have this handy valuation tool. The ever popular 1965 Shelby GT350 has long commanded a six-figure price. As of May 2021, 1965 Shelby GT350s in number 2 excellent condition are valued at $487,000, while number 1 concourse condition 1965 GT350s are valued at $587,000. This video review is intended to give an overview of what it's like to buy a Shelby GT350, but please keep in mind that values change over time. For even more details and up-to-date information, please click the link below for the full buyer's guide on Hagerty.com. So I am a Shelby guy. I've written books about them, I collect them, and I love the damn things. And what I'm driving right now is my favorite Shelby Mustang of all time. The 1965 GT350 is the Mustang that saved the Mustang brand. I know, that sounds preposterous, but it's true. Lee Iacocca came up with the Mustang to capture the youth market, and it did. But he knew without some teeth that the Mustang wouldn't survive. Cars need a performance image to worm their way into our brains and to make us love them. They need to win races. They need to be an aspirational car. And they need to make you feel good when you drive them. And the Mustang, as good as it is, was not a top-notch performance car. But to give it the teeth that Iacocca knew it needed, he called his buddy Carroll Shelby. And as the famous quote goes, Carroll Shelby told him, "I can't make a racehorse out of a mule." But Iacocca reminded him of the importance of his relationship with Ford, and Shelby soon remembered the importance of that as well, and decided that yeah, he'd make a racehorse out of this mule. So what he did was he took knockdown K-code high-performance Mustangs and made them into an SCCA B production legal 2-seat sports car. And in the SCCA rules, you could either modify the engine or the chassis, but not both. So he left the essentially stock K-code high-performance 289 and made the chassis the way he wanted it to be. They modified the front suspension. They threw traction bars on the rear suspension. They added a lightweight aluminum T10 4-speed transmission, an aluminum intake, a bigger Holly 4-barrel, tubular exhaust headers, high-performance wheels, high-performance Goodyear tires. All of these things are well documented in history, and everybody knows them. The outside of this 1965 GT350 might confuse a lot of people. For one, it doesn't have the classic Guardsman blue over-the-top Le Mans stripes that everybody's used to see on these cars. And why is that? Because from the factory, only about half of the 1965 GT350s produced came with those optional stripes. Most of them were installed later either at the dealership or by subsequent owners. The other thing that often throws people for a loop are these plain steel wheels. Chrome lug nuts, no hubcaps. This is the standard wheel you got when you did not order the optional Shelby Krager mag wheels. So a lot of cars came with these wheels, and they were instantly switched out for an aftermarket mag wheel by their original owners or a later owner even. Now let's talk about color. While 1966 GT350s and all the Shelby Mustangs after that were available in basically a rainbow of colors, in 1965, you got one choice, Wimbledon white. Every one of the 562 1965 Shelby Mustangs was painted this color. So let's recap. When you were buying a new 1965 GT350 from Shelby, you didn't have a lot of choices. You got a white one. You got standard side stripes. You could buy the optional over-the-top Lama stripes, and you could buy a set of mag wheels. That's it. You couldn't get air conditioning. You couldn't get a radio. You couldn't get any number of creature comforts that people wanted. What you also got was what made the GT350 the GT350. You got obnoxious side exiting exhaust. You got a 289 K-code V8 upgraded with some Shelby components. You also got a component that caused a lot of issues for people that bought these cars not knowing what it meant. And that's the Detroit locker in the rear differential. This thing clunked, banged, snapped, chirped the tires, and all kinds of crazy stuff just driving around. It was standard equipment on the 1965 GT350, and it's the same thing they used in the competition cars. So on the inside, let's just concentrate on what's different about a 65 GT350 from just a regular old 1965 Mustang fastback. For one, you'll notice this big gauge pod attached to the dashboard. This contains an oil pressure gauge and the tachometer that Shelby added. You also notice a wood-rimmed aluminum steering wheel. The early cars had a 16-inch wheel borrowed from the Cobra, but the later cars had a 15-inch wheel, so regular-sized humans could actually move their leg and work the clutch without being pinched between the door handle and the steering wheel. There is no horn button on the steering wheel, so what they did was they moved to a momentary switch on the dashboard. Now, all of these parts, if they are missing, are not easy to find, nor are they inexpensive to buy today. So you really need to make sure that you have the original oil pressure gauge and tach and horn switch, steering wheel, even these Ray Brown seat belts that Shelby added. These are all unique and what makes a GT350 a GT350. Another big difference between a regular Mustang fastback and a GT350 is the fact there's no back seat. To be eligible for SCCA B production racing, this had to be a 2-seat sports car. So Shelby just ripped the back seat out and had a fiberglass package tray made that they mounted the spare tire to. Simple, easy, and effective. Now, under the hood is obviously where a lot of the magic happens in these cars. This is Ford's 289 cubic inch K-code solid lifter camshaft V8. And when it hit Shelby, it got the aluminum dual plane intake, the 715 Holly, and the tri-Y headers. And that's about it. Everything else is stock Ford K-code inside of that unit. And that's a good thing, because the 289 K-code is one of the best engines of all time. Why is it one of the best engines of all time? Because it's high revving, it makes tons of power, great amount of torque, it doesn't get hot, it doesn't complain. It's as close to an exotic European engine that ever rolled out of Dearborn or anywhere else in Detroit. The other thing you want to make absolutely sure of when considering a 65 GT350 for purchase is it really the GT350 it purports to be? Here's where you start with that quest. Check for the original Shelby VIN tag. It's riveted here to the driver's side inner fender. A lot of cars have a reproduction tag, so you really need to do your research to be able to tell the differences between a real one and a fake one. Underneath this Shelby VIN tag is the Ford serial number. That is the serial number of the car that Shelby started with when they made it into a GT350. If a car gets in a front-end accident, this panel is often replaced, which means that number goes away. So what you need to do is to drill out one rivet from this Shelby VIN tag, gently slide it out, verify there is a Ford serial number underneath it, and then contact the Shelby American Automobile Club and have them confirm that that Ford serial number corresponds to this Shelby serial number using their production records that they obtained directly from Shelby. It goes without saying that a GT350 did start life as a Mustang, and Mustangs like to rust. So look at everything that you would look at on any old car, and especially any old Mustang. It's a unibody car. See how much of the metal is original and how much has been replaced. Every critical piece of metal on the car had a date code or an identifying stamp when it left Ford. And if you know what you're looking for, you can verify all of those today. Are the floors original? Are the frame rails original? Have the quarter panels been replaced? If these cars were in the wrong environment, they get rusty. So don't forget, even the best GT350 in the world is still a Mustang underneath. Make sure all the stuff you look at on a Mustang is good, even though it's a Shelby. Chances are the GT350 you're looking at will not be as well restored as this. This is a really special example, but it does serve to show us what one should look like if all things are perfect. This car has all of its original components. The original Shelby T-shaped aluminum oil pan, for example. The original tri-Y headers. All of the original stuff from Ford had special identifying marks and date codes that true collectors really look for today. You want as many original Ford and Shelby parts on your Shelby as possible. One thing that is absolutely critical on a GT350 is to ascertain if it is the original drivetrain or not. That Ford VIN that we discussed before will be stamped on the passenger side of the engine block, and it should match the chassis of the car. If it's not there, obviously the engine's been replaced. But if it is there, you also have to figure out if it's original or if it's been re-stamped during a restoration in an attempt to deceive a potential purchaser or somebody down the road. Now, behind that K-code engine on a GT350 is an aluminum Borg-Warner T10 close ratio transmission. This is different than a regular Mustang and their Ford top-loader transmission. This is a component that is unique to a GT350. These are a fragile unit. When these cars got driven hard and raced hard, these aluminum transmissions would break and blow apart. So finding an original aluminum T10 transmission today is nearly impossible. If you do find one, plan to spend upwards of $15,000 to get a correct transmission for a 65 GT350. So don't look at one of these that has a cast iron T10 or a top loader in the place where the original aluminum transmission should be and think it's an easy fix, because it's not. And as I mentioned, this is an impressively restored example of a GT350. All of the components are correct. It has all of its original sheet metal. Even these little drip marks on the floor pans are correct. That's how it left Ford. Ford ran these through a dip tank to rust-proof them, and they came out dripping. When the drips dried, they left these drip marks. And while people not familiar with how a Mustang was built look underneath a GT350 and say, why is it so sloppy and why is there so much overspray? That's the way they were built. The cars were dipped in red oxide primer, then the exterior of the car was painted, meaning the white paint blew into the floors, and then they blacked out the rocker panels, meaning black overspray covered the white, which covered the red. This extended about halfway in towards the transmission tunnel. These are all critical details if you want to have a GT350 restored well enough to win in concourse competition. There are no compromises in here. This car was made to do one thing. It was made to be a fast, unruly, hand-built, low-production Mustang.